Coming up on International Trade Focus, we'll discuss the World Trade Organization WTO's forecast for a rebound in global trade, the opportunities presented by the AFCFTA, and how Ghana can leverage these developments for economic growth and development.
On this week's edition of International Trade Focus, we are focusing on the latest development in global trade and what it means for a country like Ghana. Now, according to a recent report by the World Trade Organization, WTO, global trade is expected to rebound in 2024-2025 after a contraction in 2023. But what are the opportunities and risks for Ghana in this projected growth? We'll be exploring this story in depth and examining how Ghana can leverage this growth to drive expansion and development to its economy. Stay tuned. International Trade Focus is brought to you by Gold Good Energy, ADB, Truly Agric, and more, Public Elegance, and Pediasi Valley Resort. My name is Anna Spiu. Our focal point segment comes up next.
The World Trade Organization, WTO, has forecast a rebound in global trade with a projected increase of 2.6% in 2024 and 3.3% in 2025, following a contraction of 1.2% in 2023. This positive outlook is attributed to the anticipated decline in inflationary pressures, allowing real incomes to grow and boosting consumption of manufactured goods. However, regional conflicts, geopolitical tensions, and economic policy uncertainty pose substantial downside risks to the forecast. So what is the impact of this forecast on international trade for Africa? Africa's exports are expected to grow faster than any other region in 2024, with a projected increase of 5.3%. This growth, experts believe, is partly due to the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, which aims to create a single market of goods and services across Africa. The AFCFTA has the potential to increase intra-African trade, boost economic growth, and reduce poverty. In Ghana, the AFCFTA is expected to increase trade volumes and attract foreign investment, particularly in the manufacturing and services sectors. The country has already taken steps to implement the agreement, including the establishment of a national AFCFTA coordination office and the development of an AFCFTA implementation strategy. However, Ghana still faces challenges such as infrastructure gaps and limited economic diversification, which need to be addressed to fully benefit from the AFCFTA. The AFCFTA has the potential to increase trade among African countries, reduce dependence on external partners, and promote economic integration. By eliminating tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the AFCFTA can increase trade volumes, attract foreign investment, and promote economic growth. The agreement also has the potential to increase economic diversification, promote industrialization, and reduce poverty. Despite the positive outlook, downside risks remain, including regional conflict, geopolitical tensions, and economic policy uncertainty. These risks can limit the extension of the trade rebound and impact international trade activities in Africa, including Ghana. For example, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic have already disrupted global supply chains and impacted trade flows. The expected rebound in global trade is a positive sign for international trade activities in Africa, including Ghana. However, downside risks remain, and countries need to be aware of these risks and take steps to mitigate them. The implementation of the AFCFTA has the potential to increase trade volumes, attract foreign investment, and promote economic growth in Africa, but countries need to address infrastructure gaps and limited economic diversification to fully benefit from the agreement. It's been recommended that to maximize the benefits of the AFCFTA and mitigate downside risks, African countries, including Ghana, should address infrastructure gaps, including transportation and energy infrastructure, promote economic diversification, including industrialization and services sector development, implement policies to reduce non-tariff barriers and increase trade facilitation, enhance regional cooperation and coordination to address regional conflicts and geopolitical tensions, develop strategies to mitigate the impact of external shocks such as COVID-19 pandemic, improve political stability and economic policy certainty, increase investment in human capital and technology, and promote regional integration and cooperation. By taking these steps, African countries can maximize the benefits of the AfCFTA and promote economic development and growth.
On this week's edition of International Trade Focus, we are delving into the latest global trends and its impact on Ghana. Now, the World Trade Organization has released a forecast that indicates that global trade is about to bounce back, or global trade is bouncing back, with the African continent expected to experience some growth in the export sector. Now, Ghana being a part of the African continent, I believe it's in the right direction for us to presume that this export growth is going to trickle down to us and then in turn boost our economy as well. Joining me in the discussion today is Ziad Hamwi. Ziad is the National President of the Borderless Alliance Ghana Division. Ziad, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, what's up?
It's been a while. What have you been up to?
We are around. I've just returned from a meeting with in Brussels on the World Customs Organization, and we had some very interesting conversations about how customs want to interconnect global systems and trade. And before that, there was the meeting in Rabat with the FAO. That is where we were talking. Our main messages as Borderless Alliance were clear. We were talking about the collaboration and partnership between the private sector and the public sector on policy issues.
Now, I know topics like this excite you. Now, the World Trade Organization's reports indicating that the African continent is going to experience some growth as far as our exports sector is concerned, and with Ghana obviously being part of the continent. First of all, what's your take on the report?
So I've looked at it in favorable light. The World Trade Organization always publishes reliable information with the trends. Now, the only thing which I look at hesitantly is about the share of Africa as a continent in global or international trade. We know that the percentage of trade of Africa is not that significant with regard to the international trade. And we do hope that African share of international trade increases. And we know that some of the disruptions in the global value chains have affected Africa more than it has affected the rest of the world, because apparently we are more reliant on trade with the rest of the world than we are on the trade that is generated internally.
I believe you summarized what we'll be looking at in this interview. Now, taking a look at Ghana's critical case, I mean, you are privy to the private sector, the manufacturing sector. From your encounter all of these years, do you feel that we are in the position to compete internationally or to compete globally so that we can also benefit, from some of these export earnings, which will in turn boost the economy?
The aspirations are very nice and attractive, and the potential is there. We have a country that is very well positioned geographically in the continent and the world, well connected. We have a lot of resource endowments to be thankful of, whether our inland waterways or whether our endless resources, oil, gold, cocoa, lithium, phosphate, you can count. So much potential. But then when it comes to the ground, how do we translate all of these resource endowments into an actual economic opportunity now to accelerate economic growth? We know that the world has come out from a major disruption with COVID, and that has reduced the momentum of economic development across the whole world. Ghana has not been spared of that, but at least in some ways, we were spared the worst of it. But now it's time to find the spark to light economic development and to put the country back on its course. I think we have the potential to benefit from boosting intra-African trade. In fact, that was the reason why we actually aggressively sought to bid to host the AFTA Secretariat in Accra a few years ago, and we've managed to do that. So it means that we are committed to regional integration and we are committed to boosting intra-African trade. And we do have the resources, human resources, and actual mineral and non-mineral resources to do. But now when it comes to the actual realities on the ground, we have the frameworks for the AFCFTA, national framework for implementation. We have our trade policies, we have our investment policies. We have most of what it takes to benefit from it. But some of the circumstances have always held us back, whether from the rising, for example, the recent depreciation of the currency, or some of the perennial stubborn issues like, for example, the high financial cost, the borrowing cost, the overhead costs. Some of these have weighed on the competitiveness of the local producers and manufacturers. So I think that if we were to tap into the unlocked potential of intra-African trade, I think we have to look at some of these structural challenges which have weighed on the country in order to make sure that we can benefit from it in the longer term. We have been trying to address some of these issues, and we have been very active in terms of, for example, benefiting from the digitalization of our economies in some areas. But then, beyond the digitalization, there needs to be more support to the local entrepreneurs, to the indigenous companies, to build a more enabling business and trade environment. And all of these elements at the moment, as you can see, I mean, we don't need to talk about it. It's around us. The difficulties are there, but the solutions also are there. So something needs to be done.
You've indicated that the challenges are obviously there for all to see, and the solutions are there as well. You talked about taking advantage of the emerging digital trends in order to position ourselves to be able to compete. What other solutions are there?
I'd like to start by saying that in order to accelerate your economic development as a nation, you have to look at three main pillars of activities. The first one is to manufacture local goods and to build your manufacturing basis so that you can later on fall on it to trade. The second one would be to identify the markets across the continent and beyond so that you can export your products. And then finally, you have to move these goods which you are trading from the country of production to the country of consumption. And that is where you also start to look at the logistics and the infrastructure and the environment and the challenges along with the connectivity between the country of manufacturing or production and then the country of consumption. And with this, you can come out with a list of the main challenges and the priorities in the countries in which you operate. The continent is so huge that you can't basically move all of your trade by trucks. You might be able to do that in sections of West Africa for regional trade. But then when you want to go beyond that, you have to use your maritime lanes. And so the continent is not as connected to itself as it's supposed to be. And that is where we have to look at how to come up with a framework that allows us to connect better to ourselves as African nations and to examine the rules of cabotage, not just of Ghana itself, because we have our law of cabotage, but regional and also a common African framework basically for short sea shipping. That will be one of the areas to examine. Of course, we can't come up with an exhaustive list over this short interview. I just want to mention a few that I think have not been adequately targeted. I also think that there are so many red tapes along the borders, the international borders, which are preventing the competitive trade across borders, whether within West Africa in the ECOWAS framework or with the rest of the world. There are just too many hindrances and challenges and non-tariff barriers that are preventing our goods from being, first of all, exported competitively, and second, from being produced competitively. Most of the times, you will need to import some raw material or components that enter into your local manufacturing. And that is also where you find that your trade environment is not enabling enough to allow you to manufacture or to produce effectively and competitively. And all of these factors will have to be taken into consideration, and some solutions need to be proposed in order to address some of the more pertinent issues that have to do with international trade.
So,
where to start, huh? You look at it and then, so look, we have some starting points. We do have some starting points. You know, for example, that the Ghana Export Promotion Authority has come out recently with this National Export Development Strategy. So we have this kind of document that is there. And so we also have the National AFCFTA Implementation Strategy. And Ghana itself has its trade policies in place. So the first starting point, I believe, is to find out where these three documents merge and what are the opportunities where Ghana as a government can come in to support the local manufacturers and producers in order to identify the viable markets, and then to help to support them to reduce their costs and to improve their competitiveness.
Right. So you've had the opportunity, by being the national president of Borderless Alliance Ghana, to interact on a regional level, on a continental level, with several countries as far as the continental free trade, its implementation, and certain factors are concerned. Now, Ghana is the host nation of the continental free trade. But when you look around, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to information dissemination, we are doing really well when it comes to that. But when it comes to private sector involvement, we are disseminating the information to them. But are they really aware of, the contribution that we need from them? Policymakers, what are policymakers doing as far as the private sector is concerned, to get them on board so that we can work hand in hand? Comparing Ghana, our preparedness as far as continental free trade is concerned, I mean, trading has already begun, but comparing our preparedness to that of other countries, how would you rank us? Now, I want you to play the devil's advocate.
So look, first of all, let me also say that Ghana is not only a host of the AFCFTA Secretariat, but we are also members of the Guided Trade Initiative of the AFCFTA, which is like a pilot phase of the countries that are more ready than the other countries that have ratified the trade to start with the trade under the AFCFTA. And in fact, there has been some trade that took place under the AFCFTA, whether export from Ghana or import into Ghana. But we have to be honest and to say that the volumes have not been up to the expectations. In fact, the volumes have not been that good across the continent. The volumes are yet to pick up. And in a way, we hear people more and more whispering whether the AFCFTA is losing the momentum or is losing its shine. Because we have been so many high hopes when the AFCFTA entered into effect in July 2019 in Niamey.
So it's already been 5 years.
It's close to 5 years, right? Now, in their defense, the protocols were still being in discussion when the AFCFTA entered into force in 2019. And the agreement was that while the negotiations were taking place to finalize the various protocols and the rules of origins and the various other components of the protocols, that the implementation will be rolling out with the countries that were ready, so that the other countries will follow. Keep in mind that Africa is around 55 countries, across Africa. And so to bring all of these numbers of members on the same chapter, on the same page with regard to international trade at the same time is an impossible feat. It has always been like that. And then no free trade agreement or international regional agreement has become effective, fully effective from its entry into force before. It's very normal, right? But at the same time, the volumes need to pick up somehow. And so it leads to the question about whether there are no fundamental issues or concerns or challenges that are slowing down the progress of our AFCFTA and continental ambitions. I think Ghana is better positioned than many of the other African countries with regards to first of all, the preparedness to engage in trade under the AFCFTA. But at the same time, we have been slowed down by some of the structural challenges that we are yet to resolve. We have mentioned some of them earlier on. We were talking about the high borrowing costs. We're talking about the high overhead costs. Currently, we also have a problem of currency losing its value. Depreciation also comes with its challenges. It's not a constant thing. It goes up and down with depreciation issues in Ghana, but it also adds up to the challenges that we have. There are so many other challenges, right? But these are some of the main ones. And I think that the opportunity is still there. Well, Africa is still a land of opportunity. You can tell that some countries are still growing and continuing with their relationships with other partners. I mean, as an African country, Africa is not your only partner in the world. There's the European Union, there's the United Kingdom, there's the United States, there's China, there's Russia, there's so many other players out there. And so countries will have to prioritize based on their international markets and on their priorities. And then at the same time, you have to work harder on identifying viable opportunities across Africa that would justify the expansion of the resources, not only to benefit from these opportunities, but also to make sure that it is more competitive and beneficiary to do that in comparison to the other trade partners out there. Because keep in mind, all the trade partners are eyeing a slice of the pie. Yeah. And so you need to compete with these kinds of international partners while at the same time working on building your competitiveness as a country to unlock your local manufacturing and production and to benefit from international trade, more especially in our case of AFCFTA, with your African markets. And this brings us back to the fact that we are still moving and progressing at a much slower rate than we have hoped for initially. And it poses the questions, why, right? Are we part of the problem or part of the solution? Is there something in particular that needs to be resolved internally, or is it external? But in all cases, we need to open up to this collaboration and partnership with the various components of international trade. And the private sector is part of the ecosystem, not only in terms of the dissemination of the policies that are being discussed by the various parties to the AFCFTA, but throughout the policy cycle. There should be prior consultation in order to agree on the list of priorities between the economic operators and governments. There needs to be a continued engagement during the negotiation phase in order to come up with the policies that also align between these. And then later on, there needs to be a continued engagement in order to amplify the messages and the policies that come out from these conversations. Because eventually, you need to generate enough local buy-in from the local manufacturers and consumers before you can decide that today we are going to move to explore African markets and then we are going to unlock the potential and we want you to be with us both as producers but also as consumers. Because trade is not just import, trade is not just export, right? So all of these factors need to be taken into consideration if we were to build the local buy-in that is necessary to make sure that the AFCFTA takes off and that we reap the benefits of this increased economic activity across the continent.
Ziad Hamwi is the national president of the Borderless Alliance Ghana division. So our guest for today, as we discuss the WTO's forecast that indicates that Africa has seen a growth in its export sector. We took a look at whether this will automatically trickle down to Ghana's export sector, some of the challenges and what we need to address in order to take advantage of the growth in Africa's export sector. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. On our in-depth segment this week, we are taking a look at the WTO's forecast that indicates that Africa has seen a growth in its export sector. We took a look at whether this will automatically trickle down to Ghana's export sector, some of the challenges and what we need to address in order to take advantage of the growth in Africa's export sector. Joining us in this discussion is Ziad Hamwi. Ziad Hamwi is the national president of the Borderless Alliance Ghana division. Now, pardon us if it seems as if we are being partial towards the African Continental Free Trade. Now, there are a lot of trading blocs. The EU bloc, for instance, is one of them. But when we take a look at the AFCFTA, which is something for the continent, by the continent, taking a look at the market share of being about 3.4 trillion, GDP for the whole continent, it's only right that we focus on this, which is a trade bloc by the continent for the continent. Okay, so Ziad, the report also talked about taking advantage of digital service trade. So there's an emergence in the digital world, and the WTO's report indicated that there's been a growth as far as digitalization is concerned, as far as taking advantage of emerging digital trends for the African continent. What's your take on this, and how should we position ourselves even stronger to be able to take advantage of this?
Well, there is that kind of opportunity. Yeah, or the one that is in the report. So, all right. Yes, yes. I know, right? That's a huge number. And so, but the problem here in this case is that when you bundle up all of the countries together and then you present the figure as one particular figure, it gives the false impression that it's so easy to just unlock into this potential, right? This brings us back to the bundling of the figures which we were talking about earlier. Because when you look at it as one figure for one continent, and it looks so appealing on the paper, and it makes it look so easy. Just open up the barriers and then and the frontiers, and then you have one common market. I wish it was this simple, but it's not. Now, yes, there is an opportunity, but you have to be able to, you have to be prepared to be able to benefit from this market, because the same international partners that you have might as well see it as attractive as you are seeing it, and then they will see how they want to position themselves to benefit from a slice of this pie. It's not just Africans competing for African markets, it's also international trade partners who are also looking at how to benefit from a slice of the pie of this international trade. E-commerce and digital trade is still in its infancy across Africa for various reasons. Not least because of the difficulty of integrating these markets with regards to intellectual property rights, for example, or with regards to so many other things that have to do with trade itself. But digital trade is definitely part of the ongoing negotiations with under the AFCFTA. There is a new protocol that is coming up. But the other thing is that the digital trade will also have to do with the competition laws of the various countries and regions. And that makes it a little bit trickier to implement, because once you are online, you are there, right? And so there are issues that have to do with the guiding framework and the jurisdiction and the legal implications of your business. So whose jurisdiction is it under? So all of this is still in the infancy stage, even though the potential obviously is there, because it makes a lot of sense to substitute the classic brick and mortar models with a digital presence. Nowadays, you don't have to actually go to a shop, in order to sample the goods or the services of this shop. Technology can allow you to actually do that without having to go there. You don't have to stand in the street in order to hail a cab. You can actually hail a cab from the comfort of your home, and then once it arrives, you can get notified of it, and then you go. So these are various different modes that we are experiencing every day. Even though, on the other hand, some of them are still finding it difficult to thrive in the ecosystem. You remember a few days ago, for example, we heard that Glovo is exiting the market. So all is not that easy for an early adopter. And we are still in the early phases of digital, but there's enormous potential to do this kind of digital trade and businesses. And we're not just talking about classical businesses. We're also talking about coming up with new ways of selling services, mostly, not only goods. So there will be limitations because some countries still don't have these kinds of digital strategies in place. Some countries have started working on national digital strategies. Some countries need support, regulatory framework, like, for example, cybersecurity, cyber laws, rules governing intellectual property. Sometimes even some countries that lack competition laws or investment laws. All of these will enter and factor into the digital trade, and will help either accelerate or slow down the progress of digital trade in your countries.
But for Ghana, you would rank us well, wouldn't you? I mean, we've come a long way.
We did, and there are a few models that are working on a national level. On a national level, it's easier to set up an ecosystem that you can control, and then you can roll out a business model on a country level. If your business model is country specific, then it's much easier to start up, and then start moving around. But when your business model involves crossing borders, that is where it becomes trickier. And remember that the whole regional integration concept is about integrating the markets so that you end up with a larger pool that you can access. So for example, you're in Ghana, you want to sell furniture for Burkina Faso, for example. What currency are you going to use? These are some of the questions that now you start to ask yourself. What are the rules and regulations that apply? What are the taxes that they have to pay? Am I delivering in Burkina, or am I? And now I just gave Burkina because Burkina is the second largest trading partner, irrespective of the fact that there are some particular developments with regard to their leadership and democratic practices. But I mean, so these are some of the factors that you take into consideration. For example, if you are based in Ghana and you decide that you want to expand your business's reach geographically, how possible is it? How easy is it? Do we have all the tools that we require in order to make sure that our model works out? And I'll give you an example which so far in Ghana we still have a problem and challenge with regard to transportation as an industry, logistics as an industry. When you want to deliver goods across borders, that is where we have platforms that work within Ghana. We have freight platforms where you can go online, you can request either for storage facilities or transportation facilities, or for payment options. All of this you can do on a country level. But once you have to cross the border with your rules and your regulations, that is where it becomes trickier. And this will require not only the right regulatory framework on a country level, it requires mutual collaboration with your neighbors, either on a bilateral basis or on a regional basis. So either Ghana and Burkina have to sit down to say that this is how we are going to open up our local markets for your goods or your services in that particular area. This is how we are going to harmonize it. Or if it is, for example, a regional ECOWAS framework, this is what the ECOWAS laws allows us to do. So let us also harmonize our local laws to allow this kind of transiting. Another example, for example, the SIM card interoperability across countries. Once you cross the borders, now you are no longer using your same SIM card because you are connected to a different network altogether. There are some plans to interconnect the region, to have some kind of SIM card interoperability. And they have been ongoing at regional level at ECOWAS for a while, but still not much has been affected within ECOWAS. There might be some progress within the UEMWA country in some particular areas. Maybe as a customs union, they have been faster to implement some of these changes. But so all of this will come back to the prepared and will affect the ability to unlock your potential from reaching out to regional trades and to use that through digital platforms. And the issue will also be more challenging on a continental level, because assuming that you finalize your digital trade framework on a continental level, now we come back to the same old problem of how well do we align our national laws with the continental regulations? Are we ready? Have we ratified? Yes. Have we domesticated our laws? And this is a question which we don't seem to be asking too often these days with the implementation of the AFCFTA. We have all been asking whether country A or country B have ratified their laws. But once you ratify, what's the next step? You have to domesticate these laws, which means you have to review these laws that you have ratified and look at your local laws. The laws for the establishment of a company, do we align with what the AFTA is doing? If not, what are we going to do? How are we going to go back to the parliamentarians? What are we going to do? How are we going to amend our laws? Things like that. So this is part of the domestication process. And these questions will become more relevant and pertinent as we delve more into digital trade and how to align our national laws with our regional laws and with our continental laws, for example. We're still a long way ahead.
Now, the report also spoke about geopolitical tensions and policy uncertainty. I know this is like your niche. So geopolitical tensions and policy uncertainty being a hindrance to export growth. What's your take on this? You have the floor.
Look, we don't have to go too far on this one, and we don't have to, I mean, you don't have to go too far outside of Ghana's borders to notice that our main market, for example, our main trading partner, which was Burkina Faso, woke up one day a few months ago with a change of regime. Let's call it an unconstitutional change of regime. And then so before you know it, this particular government is now the government of the day that you have to deal with, that you have to negotiate with, and that you have to continue to hope to move forward in the future together. And remember that ECOWAS is a group of 15 countries. Some of these countries have expressed their unhappiness about the way things are going. So it adds more friction and tension. It slows us down when we feel that we are no longer sharing the common views and that we are holding the common responsibilities and that we are prepared to solve them together. I think some of the challenge can be solved, but some of the challenge will require more collaboration with people from outside of the system. You can be in Ghana, you can have all the best of it, of interest. You have your markets actually over there. They have their markets over here, but sometimes at a certain political level, it might get stuck. So how to move with it? I think it's a conversation to have not only between economic operators, but also at a governmental level to see how we can bring back and to restore the markets to a situation where we are all open to normalizing our business and economic activities together.
And this is an election year. Do elections have a direct correlation?
This is Africa's election year, isn't it?
Right.
How many countries are having elections this year?
Right.
They've started pouring one after the other. We had the Senegal election. We had the Togo election. At the end of the year, we have the Ghana election. So yes, it's a year of elections, a lot of political uncertainty, but that shouldn't hamper the economic ambitions that we have just because of the political uncertainties. Sometimes you have to keep it in mind as a possible potential risk. And that is why sometimes you find that in some countries during the election years, businesses slow down in some areas, they pick up in some areas, but I don't think it is something to be afraid of. It's just a risk that needs to be planned against. The same way when you are ordering preparing for international trade and you review your risk and then you prepare yourself against it. This will not be anything different. I don't think it will have to affect our ambitions, our common ambitions of moving forward. And I don't think it affects our aspirations to bring together this continent as one. Because eventually, as one, we are stronger. And so that is what we need to continue to aim to aspire, to become one, to open up these markets and these peoples to each other, to reap the benefits together.
Right. Now let's take a look at the various sectors that we can pay particular attention to in order to turn our export fortunes around. We have the manufacturing sector, we have the agricultural sector. As far as you're concerned, right now, looking at the world right now and the growing trends, which sector needs the most attention at the moment?
I mean, look, we have the resources. We have the mineral resources, we have the non-mineral resources. I think what we need to focus more on is to look at how to help the local startups, the young startups, the entrepreneurs to actually help establish their small industries faster and to benefit from these resources that we have. But also, we need to look at what the more established local manufacturers and producers need and require, and then to examine this and to see how we can help. We can always continue to be strategic about the areas where governments want to intervene or to help support. But there are some areas that are just, I mean, easily identified by the private sector. That's what private sector does well. Identify an opportunity, explore the opportunity, and then turn this opportunity into a profitable business venture.
The report has been released, beautiful report, and there's a bounce back. And the continent has, achieved success, I'll say, by experiencing growth in our export sector. And the report is predicting that it's going to be even better for the African continent in the future. With everything that we've discussed so far, how or should policymakers take a look at this report and sort of find a way to fuse it into policy making at the moment?
Personally, I'm very optimistic that we are on the right track for recovery. I know that it looks at times as if in particular countries, let's say Ghana or others, that things will look harder than they actually are. But it's not only Ghana that is suffering from some of these challenges. There are some areas that are where our challenges are self-inflicted. I agree. But at the same time, I would say let us be cautiously optimistic about the growth of the export sector. Let us continue to build a more enabling sector to allow us to benefit from this export-led economic diversification, because we can no longer continue to afford to rely on cheap imports from outside, which will hurt us in the longer term. We have to build our own resilience, and we have to build our own sustainability by developing our own local and regional value chains. If we don't do this now, we are going to continue to bear the consequences in the medium run and longer run. So let us start to look at how we can improve our economies away from consumer-oriented to production-oriented. Let us harness this economic potential of Ghana and let us move forward with it. And let us hope that the implementation of the AFCFTA will accelerate and that we will find ourselves in a better position by looking at the main challenges, resolving these challenges, and profiting from the opening from the AFCFTA opportunity.
And that was Ziad Hamwi. Ziad Hamwi is a national president of the Borderless Alliance Ghana division. He was our guest for today as we discussed the WTO's forecast that indicates that Africa has seen a growth in its export sector. We took a look at whether this will automatically trickle down to Ghana's export sector, some of the challenges and what we need to address in order to take advantage of the growth in Africa's export sector. You're watching International Trade Focus. News and events comes up shortly. Don't go away. And it's a wrap for this week's edition of International Trade Focus. Join us same time next week for some more on international trade-related activities here in Ghana and beyond. International Trade Focus is brought to you by Goral, Good Energy, ADB, Truly Agric, and more, Public Elegance, and Pediasi Valley Resort. My name is Anna Spio. Join us same time next week. Bye-bye.